Welcome back. Oh, it's good to be back. Episode 4 of The Elephant in the Room with Bradley Devlin. I, of course, am Bradley Devlin. Thank you so much for joining us. However you may be listening, wherever you may be, whoever you may be with, we really do appreciate all the support that you give us over at the Elephant in the Room podcast, as well as Lone Conservative. So, we've got a lot to get to today and not a ton of time. So, I want to jump right in. But first, I got to tell you about TPUSA's Student Action Summit. It's happening again this year from December 19th through the 22nd. And as of now, the confirmed speakers are Donald Trump Jr., Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, Rand Paul, and Dan Crenshaw, as well as many more. And folks, these are just the confirmed speakers so far. I mean, you know Charlie Kirk has connections, and you know he's got quite a lot up his sleeve. So expect big things from this conference as more details and speakers are released. And don't miss it if you've got a shot to go. So if you're interested in attending, go to www.tpusa.com/event. So go apply to attend this great conference. Financial aid is available. And guess what? It's in West Palm Beach in December. Do you know how nice it is down there? Sometimes it can get a little muggy. I get it. But come on. It's been a long semester. You're going to need a nice few days relaxing, hearing from some of the best names in conservatism down in West Palm Beach. It's time for campus craziness, and this week we are going to be talking about a serious and sensitive issue, and that is the issue of abortion. Abortion is important for me to talk about because I am a member of the conservative movement. I am pro-life. I've come a long way on this issue. And so for me, I feel like I have, sort of a responsibility to speak out for the unborn and to speak out for those who have been stripped of their humanity by U.S. law, shamefully stripped of their humanity by U.S. law. Also, I think abortion is a really good issue. Even though it's so emotionally charged, it's difficult to get these it's difficult to articulate these differences in a way that doesn't sound like you're attacking the other side, but it is important because it brings up the stark differences between today's progressives and conservatives. So let's talk about why this is in campus craziness. Okay, so Governor Gavin Newsom, governor of California, just signed into law a bill proposed by State Senator Connie Leyva, a Democrat from the Inland Empire, and that bill is SB 24, titled the College Student Right to Access Act. And that act will require each student health care services clinic on a California State University or University of California campus to offer abortion by medication techniques on and after January 1st, 2023. Now, sadly, to no surprise whatsoever, SB 24 had its origins at UC Berkeley. The Students United for Reproductive Justice at Berkeley, or SURGE for short, has lobbied for this bill in the past 3 or 4 years in order to, in their words, not mine, create a less complicated and more accessible process for getting medical abortion. How would this bill go about providing medical abortions on California college campuses, you may ask? Well, of course, by allocating $200,000 per campus to the University of California system and the Cal State University system for each of their student health centers to pay for the cost, both direct and indirect, of providing medical abortions. And why does this matter? Well, it's emblematic of a Democratic Party that has moved from being the party of safe, legal, and rare to the party of easy, on-demand, and free abortions. Now, former Governor Jerry Brown, even in his senility, was smart enough to veto a similar bill, SB 320, just a few years back. And he argued that the average distance to abortion providers in campus communities varies from 5 to 7 miles, and so this makes it, not an unreasonable distance, and therefore this bill is unnecessary. And that's kind of a runaround, right? It's true. Okay, this is what Jerry Brown said was true, shockingly and sadly. As of the most recent figures compiled in 2014, California has 512 abortion clinics throughout the state. That amounts to nearly 9 abortion clinics per county and more than 1 in each municipality throughout the state. The distance argument aside, that's probably not the only reason Jerry Brown vetoed the bill, which leads us to the second reason why this matters. Appropriating taxpayer dollars to abortions has long been a hot button political topic. The high Hyde Amendment on the federal side of things has tried to protect the conscience of religious and other taxpayers that are opposed to abortion while recognizing the sad fact that it is a legal practice in the United States by barring federal funds to go to abortion except if the pregnancy is a risk to the life of the woman or if the pregnancy arises from incest or rape. And the Hyde Amendment has been incredibly successful. Before the Hyde Amendment came into effect, an estimated 300,000 abortions per year were performed using federal taxpayer dollars, and that is no longer the case. So thank God for that. But that is probably more likely why Jerry Brown vetoed this bill. It was more of a political decision because the Hyde Amendment has large amounts of support. As of 2016, the Hyde Amendment was supported by 57% of voters and opposed by only 36%. And California is already among 16 states that do allocate taxpayer dollars for abortions via Medicaid. And so expanding these already rightly deemed controversial services is probably more likely why Jerry Brown decided not to go forward with the bill. But as we've seen with the Democratic Party's far shift leftward since the 2016 election cycle, almost every mainstream Democratic Party candidate has come out in support of repealing the Hyde Amendment. And this is Joe Biden included, right? Joe Biden has flip-flopped on the Hyde Amendment. He's flip-flopped all over himself, it seems, in this presidential primary race. And so, that's them trying to capture their radical progressive portion of the Democratic base. And that's really, really revealing of where their base is at the moment. And so, of course, California, being California, didn't hesitate to embrace this movement leftward, right? On signing the bill, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, said, as other states and the federal government go backward, restricting reproductive freedom, in California, we are moving forward, expanding access and reaffirming a woman's right to choose. We're removing barriers to reproductive health, increasing access on college campuses, and using technology to modernize how patients interact with providers. Now, I'd like to stop for a quick second to first evaluate the merits of the constitutional or legal arguments surrounding a woman's right to choose as established by Roe v. Wade. So if you're an American conservative and you're trying to steep yourself in the wisdom and principles of our founding documents, namely the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, you may think to yourself, there's nothing really in there that would somehow grant someone the right to terminate a pregnancy. In fact, you might think it's quite the opposite, that the Declaration of Independence says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life obviously being the prerequisite for both having the opportunity to enjoy liberties and pursue happiness. And you may also remember that the 5th and 14th Amendments say that an individual may not be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So where are they getting this right to abortion? Is this really what the founders intended? And for the second question, no, of course not. The founders are rolling in their graves, seeing the rampant perversion of the Constitution, especially by the left, and especially when such a grave decision is based on incredibly flawed and faulty logic of certain judicial opinions that are then compounded by other bad judicial decisions. So what is the basis for the Roe v. Wade decision? Well, it lies in one of the devices that the judiciary has used historically to run roughshod over the powers of the legislature, and it's called substantive due process. And its greatest hits are Dred Scott and Roe v. Wade, the two worst Supreme Court decisions in history. Substantive due process, you may say? That sounds foolish, given that process and substance are inherently different things. And you would certainly be right. And that's where the trick comes into play. Right now, normal due process is, of course, the legal requirements and process that the government, state or federal, must uphold to respect and recognize the legal rights of the individual. And in respecting those rights, that process is therefore due, which means you have the right to trial by jury in a criminal proceedings, or that in order to take someone's property from them or removing a child from an abusive home, right? There's a legal process that must be taken up to do those things. And substantive due process essentially says that there are some areas of human activity in which the government, via the state or federal government, should not be meddling with individuals' lives, no matter the process, unless the government can demonstrate some super strong reason why it must step in. Now, in substantive due process, the judiciary is attempting to hide the fact that it objects to the law itself, the substance of the law, and would like to see that law not applied, but can't necessarily find strong constitutional grounds to make that so. So they skirt the edges by picking and choosing language from the Constitution, as well as some other forms of mental gymnastics to essentially create what the courts called fundamental rights, thus invalidating the process entirely and allowing the court to have its way. And it's a pretty darn effective way to legislate from the bench, if you asked me. Now, substantive due process was first used in the Dred Scott decision, which said black people were considered property, subhuman, and not citizens, and thus voided the principles of free soil, which is, opposition to slavery in the territory and in the newly administered states, territorial sovereignty, and indeed every other aspect of anti-slavery constitutional thought. Substantive due process was relied on heavily in the 1965 Griswold v. Connecticut case that challenged an 1879 state law that banned the use of contraceptives, which established the right to privacy that was eventually used in Roe v. Wade. And I think the Connecticut law and Griswold and other laws like it are pretty foolish in and of themselves, don't get me wrong, but that's besides the point. The point is that the Constitution does not enumerate a right that protects you from a state government limiting a market transaction for contraceptives. Whether or not creating that type of law is the purpose of government and good governance is a separate question entirely. And as I said before, I don't think it is. But the Constitution obviously doesn't say too much about something like this. And you can tell even the court knew that they were reaching when they were writing this decision, because they declared a broad right to privacy formed by emanations and penumbra. Emanations and penumbras from the First, Third, Fourth, and Ninth Amendments taken together holistically to create the right to privacy in marital relations that involved a third-party provider of contraceptives. Now, the Connecticut statute thus conflicted with the exercise of this right to privacy and was therefore held void. And somehow, under this broad right to privacy, the court in Roe v. Wade found a right to abortion. And here's what Roe v. Wade says. This right of privacy, whether it be founded in the 14th Amendment's concept of personal liberty and restrictions upon state action, as we feel it is, or as the district court determined in the 9th Amendment's reservation of rights to the people, is broad enough to encompass a woman's decision whether or not to terminate her pregnancy. The detriment that the state would impose upon the pregnant woman by denying this choice altogether is apparent. Specific and direct harm, medically diagnosable even in early pregnancy, may be involved. Maternity or additional offspring may force upon a woman a distressful life in future, and psychological harm may be imminent. Mental and physical health may be taxed by childcare. So you see how quickly any solid legal grounding of this decision was abandoned by the court so that it can act more like a legislator than a legal adjudicator, right? The court's argument essentially is the right to abortion isn't in the Constitution, but it can be found in there somewhere if read with a loose enough interpretation. And so we're going to read it with that interpretation because, abortion, even though it's kind of an ugly practice, having kids is pretty stressful. And so we're going to write this court decision. Instead of writing it like a court decision, we're going to write this court case like an introduction to a bill. And it's even more absurd if you remember, like I said earlier, our 5th and 14th Amendments explicit guarantee to the right to life. Now, even if you do believe that there is a right to privacy implicated throughout the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, which I do to a certain extent, do you think that right to privacy would include conspiring with a third-party provider to terminate a biologically distinct developing human life that has absolutely no say in the matter? And is that meeting with a physician really the requisite due process of law to deprive another person of life? I don't think so. I don't think anyone in their right mind can think that it is a strong legal argument. Whether or not you just want to be a pragmatist about it, we'll tackle that argument in a moment. But moving away from the legal side of things, I mean, let's dive into the science, because I think when people know the science, then they are much more sympathetic to pro-abortion arguments that aren't only grounded in law. Okay, so as of now, the United States is one of 7 countries in the world that allows for abortions to be provided after 20 weeks. Among us, great neighbors, China and North Korea. 20 weeks is the stage of fetal development where the baby's senses are already forming and twitches from the needle of the abortion procedure. And there's this silly notion from the left that, particularly in the case of medical abortions, which are abortions via medication available up to about 10 weeks into a pregnancy, and not the traditional abortion procedure, which we think of, that crushes the baby's skull, sucks out the brains, cuts off the limbs, and then removes the child from the womb part by part. There's this funny notion about first trimester abortions that they're just a cluster of cells and that it doesn't really matter all that much. For nearly 100 years, the scientific community has recognized that life begins at fertilization. The American College of Pediatricians revisited this question of when human life begins in 2017, and they said that the predominance of human biological research confirms that human life begins at conception, at fertilization. And at fertilization, the human being emerges as a whole, genetically distinct, individuated, zygotic, living human organism, a member of the species, needing only the proper environment in order to grow and develop. And the difference between the individual in its adult stage and in its zygotic stage is one of form and not nature. And this statement focuses on the scientific evidence of when an individual human life begins. And so the science doesn't lie. Yes, it may be a cluster of cells, but left to its own natural processes, obviously it will become a fully formed human being. And this brings us to 2 terms that are often conflated in the abortion debate, and it is personhood and human life. So the difference is there a point in human development that grants someone full personhood, and can that be objectively defined? Now, more often than not, conservatives agree with the American College of Pediatricians that form and capacity change, but the nature does not. Conservatives don't see a scientific or coherent, grounded moral argument that can make a determination of when a human life achieves personhood. Now, Peter Singer, a bioethicist and professor at Princeton University, is a staunch abortion advocate, and he notices the abundance of inconsistencies in the traditional pro-choice arguments made by the mainstream left. I mean, I'll give him credit where credit is due. He is one of the only honest abortion advocates out there that I know, because he recognizes these pitfalls in the mainstream pro-choice argument. But sadly, the logical consistency that Peter Singer puts forth has painful consequences. So Singer tries to do what I told you earlier, and that is to identify a point in human development where a human life achieves full personhood, right? Singer will recognize that from the moment of fertilization, that is indeed a human baby, but it doesn't achieve the standard of personhood that he's established. And he says that personhood is rationality, autonomy, and the ability to be self-conscious. And so the most extreme pro-choicers would probably agree with this statement, right? That life in the womb does not biologically fit these criteria, and therefore it can be aborted at any time, or either that or, before 24 weeks or before 20 weeks or whenever they say that a baby can be aborted. But here's where Singer is more honest than any of them, than any of the most extreme abortion activists that you probably know. He says that given his standard of personhood, then that ought to logically be applied to everyone at all stages of life. So he's an open advocate for infanticide up until about the age of 2, right? Because newborn babies can't be rational. They're not self-conscious. They don't have any autonomy. They're completely reliant on their parents. He's also an advocate for euthanasia for the mentally ill and those with special needs. And of course, that goes without saying, abortion for those who will be mentally ill and those with special needs. Now, you might be saying, Bradley, come on, he's radical. Don't write everyone off in the pro-choice camp the same way you write off Peter Singer. And no, I'm not writing Peter Singer's argument off. Peter Singer's argument reveals the moral depravity of the logical conclusions that are in the foundations of every single pro-choice argument that you'll hear. And the left fully knows that this pro-choice fanaticism is incompatible with our moral values, which is why their definition of when a human life confers personhood is all over the map. right? Let's say your run-of-the-mill pro-choicer isn't fully on board with Singer's argument, and let's say they're just trying to be a pragmatist, that after 20 or 24 weeks, that baby confers personhood by virtue of Roe v. Wade determining that the state now has a vested interest in that child and bringing it to term. That still hasn't wrestled with any of the philosophical and moral questions that are the main drivers of this oftentimes vigorous and sometimes nasty debate. So here's where we got to educate people on the science and tell them about the consensus that a life is genetically unique at fertilization, and that after 6 weeks, a child's heart is beating and pumping its own blood, and its limbs are forming, even though it's the size of a blueberry. And tell them at 10 weeks, when your baby is the size of a kumquat, that the embryo has completed the most critical portion of development, and that his tiny limbs can bend, and fine details like nails are starting to form. And tell them at 14 weeks, your baby's brain impulses have begun to fire, and he's using his facial muscles. His kidneys are working. And if you have an ultrasound, you might even see him sucking his thumb. And then tell him at 19 weeks, your baby's senses, smell, vision, touch, taste, and hearing are developing, and they may be able to hear your voice. So look these pictures up online, show them to these individuals, and ask them to tell you that that's not a human child. And sadly, that 19-week-old human child can still be aborted in the state of California and elsewhere throughout the country. And I know I use this medical abortion story coming out of California to talk about abortion more broadly. It's important to note that all abortion is bad, and it's incompatible with our values as a country, regardless of the procedure, regardless if it's just a pill or a large surgery that removes a 20-week-old pregnancy. That is still an individual, unique, genetically different human life than your own. And that's an important thing to remember when we talk about life. All right, now it is time for Bradley's breakdown, and it's something that is much more lighthearted than the serious issue of abortion. Thank you for listening to that. Honestly, it is a heavy issue, and the ugly truths of abortion is, something that everyone has a difficult time rectifying, especially when they're told about the flimsy constitutional arguments as well as the science that says an individual is an individual from fertilization, and that there is no objective standard for when that individual achieves full personhood. So you may have seen the fourth Democratic debate, and you may have watched painfully through 3 hours of leftist drivel, and I will get into all of that drivel and how it is shaping up in the polls. What do we think is going to be the end result? Now, there's still a lot of time left, but we're going to make some predictions today. I will say that for sure. But first, I do want to tell you about Young America's Foundation and the great on-campus lectures they are going to be hosting in the near future. Andrew Klavan of the Daily Wire is going to be at the University of Memphis tonight at 7 p.m. for free. So if you're in the area, put me on pause. Go see Andrew Klavan live. You can't put Andrew Klavan live on pause. Okay, go see him and then return to this podcast, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Democratic 2020 presidential primary. Go visit him for free tonight, University of Memphis. Also, Newt Gingrich will be at USC, and no, not the University of South Carolina. I'm talking the University of Southern California on October 29th at 6 p.m. in the Bovard Auditorium. That one will also be for free. And then on October 31st at Texas A&M University at 7 p.m. in Rudder Theater, Steven Crowder will be speaking, and he is hilarious and he is great. We are big Mug Club fans over here at the Elephant in the Room with Bradley Devlin, so go check that out. Also on November 4th at 5:30 p.m. in Warren Hall B25, Scott Walker, the new chairman of YAF, will be speaking at Cornell University. So if you're interested in attending any of these free events, as I said last time I talked to you guys about the YAF on-campus lectures for free, the biggest names in conservatism, go to yaf.org/events for more information if you're interested in attending. So thank you so much for listening to that. So let's talk about something more fun, right? There was another Democratic debate early last week, and it was the fourth Democratic debate. So 12 hours of primetime TV has been wasted on some of these garbage candidates. And don't worry, they're not done yet. They're going to have another debate in November with Biden, Warren, Harris, Buttigieg, Booker, Yang, Steyer, and of course the only one upfront about his socialism, Bernie Sanders qualifying. And as of now, Tulsi Gabbard, Amy Klobuchar, Julian Castro, and Beto O'Rourke are on the outside looking in when it comes to qualifying for that debate. Now, the primaries are still plenty far away, and come February, when these primaries start to happen, there will be plenty of candidates that will have dropped out of the race, and their supporters will have been divided up among the rest of the candidates. And there's also plenty of time for candidates like Joe Biden to continue to implode, for Kamala Harris to continue to implode, and Bernie, God forbid, to have more health problems. I mean, if Bernie has more health problems and then he drops out of the race, I mean, Warren's got it wrapped up, man. There is no doubt about that. But again, plenty of room. So plenty of room for movement. But let's talk a little bit about what the polls are showing right now. So on October 14th, a Quinnipiac University poll of Democratic voters and independent voters who lean Democrat shows Warren edging out Biden, even though they're neck and neck. And Warren had 30%, Biden 27%, Sanders 11%, Buttigieg 8%, Harris 4%, and no other candidates topped 2% of the vote. And that's pretty similar to the October 8th results, in which Warren received 29% and Biden got 26%. Now, you may be saying, October 14th, that was before the last Democratic debate. What has happened since then? And I will tell you, this morning, Quinnipiac released its October 24th results, and it shows that Warren receives 28% of the vote among Democratic voters and independents that lean Democratic. Biden gets 21%, Bernie Sanders 15%, Buttigieg 10%, Harris 5%, and Klobuchar 3%. And no other candidate tops 1%. So wow, there is some separation happening between Warren and Biden. These polls from Quinnipiac are also showing that Warren has caught on to Biden on which Democratic candidate would be the best leader. Biden, given his experience, receives 32% on this question, with Warren at 28%. And this compares to an August 6th poll in which Biden had 33% and Warren only 22%. So she's really, really closed the gap there. She's also extended her clear lead on which candidate voters say has the best policy ideas. 40% goes to Warren, Biden only 16%, and Sanders 12%. So this plan for everything line seems to be sticking with these Democratic voters. And whether or not they're good plans, remains to be seen, because they're not put into action, and she's also not necessarily being honest about them to voters. But we will see. And for all this Warren sanity, there's still a cause for concern for Warren when it comes to electability. Not general electability, but who has the best shot at beating Donald Trump. Here, Biden retains a commanding lead, with 48% saying he has the best chance to defeat Trump, while only 21% of folks say the same for Warren. Now, the latest poll from Emerson, conducted from October 18th through the 21st, so after the last debate, shows Joe Biden maintaining a very, very small lead within the Democratic Party, primarily finding his support from those who supported Clinton in the 2016 primary, with 42% of those voters going to Joe Biden. 16% of 2016 Clinton supporters are in favor of Warren, and 14% in favor of Sanders. Not to mention that Biden blows every other Democratic candidate out of the water when it comes to securing the black vote. So this Emerson poll says Biden's at 27%, Sanders 25%, Warren 21%, Buttigieg 6%, Harris 5%, Yang 4%. Now, these are national polls, okay? Each poll has kind of been consistent on their results, with Biden generally trending downward, Warren trending upward, Sanders stagnating, Harris receiving an initial bump and then falling, things of that nature, even though they disagree on the leader at the moment, specifically these polls from Emerson and Quinnipiac. But I'm a big sports guy, okay? I know that sounds like one heck of a segue, but in sports, we talk a lot about momentum, right? A team with momentum is really, really hard to beat. Let's look at those Nationals, right? They had one of the worst records in baseball up until late May, and from May onward, they've had the best record in baseball now. And now they are 2 games away from winning the World Series. So momentum matters. And it's actually funny to see the commonalities between politics and sports in some sense, from a psychological and human level, right? I mean, politicians, like sports teams, they've got fan bases to maintain, and they have momentum to maintain in order for them to make a legitimate run at what they've aimed to accomplish. Of course, in terms of the Nationals, that's winning the World Series. And in terms of Elizabeth Warren, that's winning the Democratic presidential primary. And so, right, here's the Democratic primary schedule come February. Okay, this will set the stage for our momentum case. February 3rd is the Iowa caucus, February 11th, New Hampshire, February 22nd, Nevada, February 29th, South Carolina, and then March is Super Tuesday with Alabama, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Maine, Massachusetts, Minnesota, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Vermont, and Virginia. and Virginia. So there are a lot of primaries happening within less than a month span, and that means that a lot of momentum can be generated in that lead up to Super Tuesday, right? You can have good performances in Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina that can set yourself up for a Super Tuesday that can really, really bring it home. And so from polling in Iowa, right, Warren is nipping at Joe Biden's heels, and we didn't think Warren would be in this position when she announced, right? She's bringing a lot of energy and the field is generally crappy, but who would have thought that Biden would be at 21% and Warren at 20.7% in Iowa, and given 3 to 4 more months of this upward trajectory for Warren, if she can maintain her energy, and this kind of these bumbling, fizzling out performances by Joe Biden, it's very, very possible that Warren takes a commanding lead in Iowa. And it gets worse for Joe Biden come February 11th because in New Hampshire, Warren already has a more than 3-point lead on Biden, with Warren getting 27.3%, Biden 24%, Sanders 16.7%, Buttigieg 8.7%, Harris 4.7%, and Yang 2.7%. And in Nevada, Biden maintains a 4-point lead on Warren, but just like Iowa, that lead has been shrinking, with Biden at 22% and Warren at 18%. Now, in South Carolina, the first primary with a substantial amount of black voters, Biden absolutely dominates across the polls, but that doesn't mean Joe Biden should count his chicks before the eggs hatch, right? If Warren continues her trend upward and also captures votes from the progressive candidates like Beto O'Rourke, Julian Castro, and Cory Booker that I don't think will make it to the Nevada primary, if not the New Hampshire primary, then Biden's got, a big momentum problem. Current trends, even if all the candidates stayed in the race, would put Warren over Biden come February 3rd in Iowa. And if she wins by a commanding enough margin in Iowa, New Hampshire, Biden will certainly have problems in Nevada because that train is a rolling. And the margin in South Carolina will narrow and narrow and narrow. And come Super Tuesday, March 3rd, I think this thing will be all wrapped up for Elizabeth Warren. So let's go through some of the candidates, the top tier candidates, and grade their performance in the debates, as well as the debates overall, because, I don't think their performances have changed all that much outside of Kamala Harris having a good cheap shot in the first few rounds and then completely falling off a cliff as she demonstrates she has no idea how American governance works. And we're also going to be giving the campaign that they're running in general a letter grade. So let's do the B's first, right? Pete Buttigieg. I'm giving him a B+ on the debates, only because he can't seem to shut his mouth about religion and about how Jesus would have been a lefty. I think he's maligning those folks who are moderate liberals and independents when he talks about being incredibly religious, but also incredibly pro-choice. I think he's making the clingers mistake that Obama made, right? They cling to their guns and they cling to our religion, but he does get props for being the only one who is phrasing very, very progressive ideas in a moderate tone, just like Obama did, right? So he gets a B+ for that, as well as calling some other candidates out on the fact that they're not being honest about what their plans cost in the long run. For his campaign in general, I'm going to give him an A-. I mean, he's coming out of absolutely nowhere from South Bend, Indiana, and making a legitimate run as a top-tier candidate for president. So let's remember, this field had Bill de Blasio in it at one point, right? Mayor of New York City. He's crazy, and he's weird, and he's stupid. And Bill de Blasio never broke 2%. I don't think he ever broke 2% in any poll, right? And you have Buttigieg, a small town mayor, actually coming out, being articulate, sounding prepared, and running a pretty respectable campaign compared to the other big name mayors that were in this race. All right, now it's on to sloppy Joe Biden. I mean, he gets a C- for both the debate and campaign. I mean, he's Jeb Bush 2.0, right? I mean, he was handed this nomination on a silver platter. All he had to do was bring some sort of energy and not screw it up, and he can't bring the energy, and he keeps screwing it up. He can't keep up with Warren. He has no Obama endorsement still, and he seems to not really have a purpose other than he's just kind of out of things to do, and he's wants to hold more public offices. I mean, he continues to make gaffes on the debate stage and on the campaign trail, and he's way too out of touch. And also, a little too into touch when he hugs you from behind for today's Democratic Party. And that brings us to Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders gets B+ on the debates. I mean, he's above average compared with the garbage rest of the field, and he did have a particularly good moment about healthcare and coming back from that heart attack in the last debate when he kind of ran over the moderators and said, no, thank you. I appreciate it. I am in very good health. I'm feeling fantastic. But our healthcare system is rigged and it is broken. He did have a really good moment, so I'll give him B+ on that last debate particularly. But, there's nothing too different about a Bernie debate performance ever. I'm going to give him a B- on the campaign. He's kind of stuck in the polls. Warren is sapping his base's energy because she's a new figure. She's a new presidential figure that embodies those incredibly progressive Democratic base ideals. And in part, that base has those ideals now because of Bernie Sanders, because Bernie Sanders pushed the party to the left last time he won. And now Warren's kind of reaping the fruits of his labor. Let's go on to Cory Booker. I mean, Cory Booker gets a C- on both, just like Joe Biden. He's not wowing anybody. He's incredibly predictable, and he's also incredibly hypocritical. I mean, he's just not good at faking moderacy like Obama was, and he's not good at sincerity. And when he tries it, it comes off as angry, and his eyes kind of just creep everybody out. So for that reason, he gets a C-. Beto O'Rourke, F on everything. I mean, the man's a certified idiot. I mean, it literally took him failing upward his entire life until he has a legitimate chance to be senator and then president for people to realize how big of an idiot this guy is. I mean, if I was a progressive, I'd be furious because he is hurting the cause by being as extreme as possible to keep a drowning campaign afloat. And he's also saying things that the radical left doesn't want their candidates or their base to be saying out loud because they haven't found out a way to euphemistically say it yet, even though in their heart of hearts, that might just be what they want. If you haven't heard his, Beto O'Rourke's position on guns and his position on religious institutions, definitely go and listen to those portions of the Equality Town Hall and the Democratic debates because it is worth listening to. It is scary what Beto O'Rourke thinks the progressive base wants and what the even scarier part is he might actually be right that that's what they want. But as I said before, they just haven't been able to say it euphemistically yet. All right, let's talk about Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang, I'm giving a B for the debates because he's kind of timid still. He's not afraid to go out, or he's still afraid to go out and really take that time and kind of run over the moderators. And he kind of needs to go to a little bit more to war with these people when they're not making sense. So I'd like to see a more aggressive Andrew Yang in, of course, his always respectful way. And I think, surprisingly, he's had a positive cultural impact, which is why his campaign gets a B+. I just think that he's a little bit too politically immature right now to make a legitimate run, but he is consistent on his purpose and on his message, which is UBI and building a coalition of conservatives, independents, and liberals to reverse the damages done by outsourcing and automation. All right, Kamala Harris, she gets D's on both. I mean, she is condescending, she's dictatorial, and she's just cocky. I mean, she is like a rude, drunk aunt fed up with your grandpa's BS during the holidays. I mean, she's just absolutely fallen off a cliff, and she keeps doubling down on the drama and the anger in an attempt to, get those converts from the really progressive radical part of the base, but in the end it's only hurting her, and I don't think she realizes that. She keeps doubling down on the strategy that if she acts angry enough and if she's willing to use executive power to get things done, then more people will vote for her. But I think it's scaring people away a little bit that people have a baseline understanding of what the president does, and they don't want someone who is as freewheeling with those powers as she is. And that, I think, is especially true for the independents that lead Democrat, not necessarily the very progressive portion of the Democratic base. And I think that those fears of her dictatorial abuses comes out in the form of electability that people just don't think that she's electable. Why? Oh, well, as I said before, she's condescending and she's a little bit dictatorial. And so that brings us to who I think will be the Democratic nominee, Elizabeth Warren, senator from Massachusetts. She gets a B on the debates and she gets an A- on the campaign. She did well in the early debates, but she was targeted a little bit more in this past debate, and she didn't handle it all too well. Right. And so come November, especially after this Quinnipiac poll that was released today, that she is clearly the front runner, she will be everyone's punching bag, and we're going to have to see how she responds. I expect to see Buttigieg to make a move, and I expect Harris to finally go after her a little bit. And it's crazy that I'm saying this about American politicians, but Bernie is going to call her out on being a free marketeer in the past. I think that he's going to do that in the next debate to save a pretty stagnant campaign. And with that, we've got to move on from the always entertaining and silliness that is the Democratic presidential race. All right. So this week for Howl About That, we have something a little bit different than the traditional op-ed where I add my own analysis. Instead, we're going to bring you a news story from Brazil. And this was reported on by Mackenzie Bettel and Patrick Hoff over at Lone Conservative. Check out the full story over at loneconservative.com. The story is called Conservatives Assaulted After Leaving Campus Event in Brazil. Two members of the Brazilian conservative movement, Movimento Conservador, are speaking out after being assaulted and hospitalized while leaving an event at the University of Sao Paulo on October 14th. The victims, Andre Almeida and Cecilia Peraro, were attending a debate hosted by the university titled Schools with No Political Parties. Almeida said that the debate was civil, but once he left to go get dinner with Peraro, he encountered violence. Almeida claims that after he left the event, he heard a man yell, "Take off your t-shirt, fascist." Shortly after, he said he was punched in the back. When he turned around to see who assaulted him, Almeida claims he saw roughly 6 people. Both Almeida and Peraro were wearing Movimento Conservador t-shirts. As Almeida was under assault from the individuals trying to take his t-shirt, he then saw other assailants pursuing Peraro. It really fired me up, and somehow I got away from the 2 guys who were grabbing me and ran towards Cecilia to protect her, Almeida says. However, the guys who were previously beating me up followed me, and they got me pretty bad. Almeida was no longer to defend himself and lost consciousness after being hit repeatedly in the back of the head with brass knuckles. Peraro was chased by separate members of the group, and she said that they held her down and beat her, causing her face and left ear to bleed, and she said that the assault damaged her hearing. Peraro then ran away and woke up Almeida, who was losing dangerous amounts of blood. Almeida says that he heard the assailants yell, "That's our message to the effing fascists," and then they fled. Now, the attackers didn't take anything from the 2 besides Almeida's t-shirt, a fact that he argued proves the assault was politically motivated. Almeida claims he saw at least 2 of the aggressors at the University of Sao Paulo event, and he said that he believes the assailants were part of Brazil's anti-fascist movement, similar to the U.S. Antifa groups. And this story is just absolutely heartbreaking to me because here are 2 liberal professors and 2 conservative activists, one a politician and one an activist, come together and actually have a productive discussion on what we are teaching our kids in school about politics. And if you're a college student listening to this podcast, remember, civility just doesn't end in the classroom. Civility is a every waking moment type of thing. You have to do it at all times. My mom always told me to act like someone is watching you at all times. That's how you should act as a person in your moral life, in your personal life, in your public life, in your work life. Make sure that you are a good, upstanding person at all times, because once you waver on those values, it can be an awfully slippery slope, right? And I think that's what we've seen with a lot of these individuals in our generation who have embraced this type of militant violence in their political ideology, whether that's on the extreme right or the extreme left, is that they've forgotten civility, or they've decided that civility is no longer the requisite course of action for them to meet their end goals. And when that breaks down, we're not left with much other than consistent warfare between one another and the breakdown and the degradation of institutions that are valuable to our society, like higher education, like the family, like our neighborhoods and our communities. So please go read this Lone Conservative story in full. Yes, it is incredibly heartbreaking, but it is very informative on providing an international context to the intolerance that is so prevalent on our American college campuses today. All right, so that just about does it for the How About That segment, and just about does it for us over here at the Elephant in the Room for this fourth episode. But it is not done yet. We've still got our Warrior of the Week inbound, and it is a great Warrior of the Week. But first, I do got to say, if you value the information that you receive from this podcast and that you receive from Lone Conservative articles more generally, please help us out by going and donating at loneconservative.com. Go up to the top of the screen, press that button donate, and it will take you straight to a PayPal page where you can contribute to Lone Conservative and help us bring you more information and to help us reach more individuals in the young conservative movement, not only in the United States, but worldwide. So thank you so much for your support and for listening to this podcast. Now it's time for Warrior of the Week. So our Warrior of the Week this week is Bill Gaskins from Washington State University. He's actually from the class of 1969 at Washington State University, but he has been an active member on campus, helping pharmaceutical students and mentoring them. And so this year, he was recognized with the first ever R. Keith Campbell Lifetime Achievement Award at the Crimson Gala. And the proceeds of the Crimson Gala at Washington State University go to a scholarship fund in Bill Gaskins' name. And that scholarship fund this year, for the first time ever, is going to Monica Sinez, an Army combat veteran and mother. And she said that she is going to be working in urban areas with low-income populations to increase their understanding of medications and empower them to improve their health. That is some fantastic work done by both Bill Gaskins and Monica Sinez. So congratulations to both of you on receiving this scholarship and this Lifetime Achievement Award, as well as thank you for all the great work that you guys have done and will do in the future.